The operating room was still. Not the ordinary stillness of focused hands and quiet concentration, the kind surgeons train their entire lives to sustain. This was a different kind of still. The kind that falls over a room when something has gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. Dr. Richard Hargrove, chief of surgery, decorated attending. The man whose name was carved into the stone above the hospital's east wing lay on the cold floor of operating room 4. His face the color of old concrete, one hand pressed flat against his chest. His breath came in shallow, desperate pulls. The monitors screamed. 3 nurses stood frozen, looking at each other the way people do when no one knows what to do next. And in the corner of that room, still wearing the oversized white coat of a third-year medical student, still holding the clipboard he'd been gripping when Dr. Hargrove had told him 40 minutes earlier that he didn't belong in this or Marcus Elijah Carter watched. He wasn't frozen. He wasn't panicked. He was thinking. And then, in a voice so quiet and so certain it cut right through the chaos, Marcus said, "I know exactly what's happening to him." Nobody in that room laughed this time. But this story doesn't begin on that floor. It begins nearly 6 weeks earlier, in a lecture hall that smelled of coffee and chalk dust and ambition, on the morning when Dr. Richard Hargrove looked at Marcus Carter for the very first time and decided, before a single word had passed between them, exactly who Marcus was. He was wrong. Marcus Elijah Carter was 27 years old, and he had been fighting for something his entire life. Not in the loud, dramatic way that word, fighting, sometimes implies. He didn't argue or protest or demand. Marcus fought the way his grandmother had always taught him to fight, quietly, relentlessly, with his head down, and his work speaking louder than anything his mouth could ever say. He grew up in West Baltimore, specifically on a narrow block called Fulton Avenue, in a row house with a screen door that didn't close all the way, and a kitchen where the overhead light had been flickering for so long that nobody noticed anymore. His grandmother, Ruth Carter, Nana Ruth, as everyone in the neighborhood called her, had raised him from the age of 8. When a drunk driver on Route 40 took both of his parents in a single terrible second and left a small boy standing at the edge of a life that could have gone in any number of directions. It went in the direction of Ruth Carter's kitchen table. That's where Marcus did his homework, every night without exception, from 3rd grade all the way through his senior year of high school. That table had seen chemistry textbooks and calculus worksheets, and eventually, the acceptance letter to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, which Nana Ruth had read 3 times with her glasses on, and then folded so carefully that the creases were perfect, like origami. She kept it in the Bible on her nightstand. Marcus knew this. He had seen it there. He was not the kind of student who made a lot of noise about being exceptional. He never corrected professors loudly, or waved his hand with impatience when slower students took their time with a concept. His classmates sometimes underestimated him for this, mistook his quietness for uncertainty, his stillness for disengagement. They would find out eventually that those quiet eyes of his had a way of seeing things that other eyes missed entirely. Patterns in data, anomalies in presentation. The subtle, almost invisible clinical details that separate a correct diagnosis from a dangerous mistake. He had a theory about why this was. His father, James Carter, had died of an undiagnosed aortic dissection at the age of 31. The emergency room doctors at the time had sent him home with antacids and instructions to follow up with a gastroenterologist. They had looked at a man complaining of severe back pain, sudden sweating, and a tearing sensation in his chest, and they had seen acid reflux. They had not seen what was tearing apart inside him. James Carter died in the parking lot of a Walgreens on the way home. His wife, Diana, was driving. She watched it happen. 14 months later, she was gone too, a different accident, a different road, the same pitiless randomness. 8-year-old Marcus had been in the backseat of a different car. He survived because of the placement of a child safety seat that Diana had buckled improperly, but that somehow held him anyway. Sometimes Marcus thought about that buckle, about the random geography of being alive. He became a doctor because of his father. More specifically, he became a doctor because of the symptom list that a Johns Hopkins internist had shown him during a pre-med advising session his sophomore year of college. A list of aortic dissection presentations. That matched, almost word for word, what his father had described to the ER doctor the night he died. Marcus had read that list 3 times, then gone to the bathroom and stood over the sink for a long time, breathing slowly. This is what nobody saw, he thought. This is what I'm going to learn to see by the time Marcus started his 3rd-year surgical rotation at Hargrove Memorial University Hospital. He had spent more private hours studying aortic and vascular emergencies than almost any topic in medicine. Not because it was tested heavily, not because it was glamorous, because it was the thing he felt in his bones, the thing he owed his father. He paid his own way through medical school on a combination of academic scholarships, full rides, plural, and evening shifts at a CVS pharmacy 3 blocks from campus, where he ran the register and sometimes counseled elderly customers about their medication interactions. He sent $200 home to Nana Ruth every month without fail. She tried to refuse it. He mailed it anyway. He owned exactly 2 white coats, 3 pairs of dress trousers, and 1 pair of clean sneakers that he kept by the door of his studio apartment. On the windowsill above the kitchen sink, he kept a small framed photograph of his parents, James and Diana Carter, young and laughing, standing in front of something that might have been the ocean. He touched the frame every morning before he left, every single morning. This was Marcus Carter. This was the person Dr. Richard Hargrove was about to decide he already knew. Hargrove Memorial University Hospital occupied 6 city blocks in the East Baltimore Medical Corridor and functioned less like a hospital and more like a small sovereign nation with its own culture, its own language, its own rigid and unspoken hierarchy. 3rd-year medical students were somewhere near the bottom of that hierarchy. They answered to 4th years. 4th years answered to interns. Interns answered to residents. Residents answered to fellows. Fellows answered to attendings. Attendings answered to department chiefs. And at the top of the surgical hierarchy, unchallenged, unquestioned, and acutely aware of his own position at all times, sat Dr. Richard Harrison Hargrove. His credentials were genuine. Nobody disputed that. At 58, Dr. Hargrove had performed over 4,000 surgeries, published 63 peer-reviewed articles, and trained some of the most capable surgical residents in the country. His technique was precise, efficient, and frequently taught as a standard. The east wing of the hospital, the Hargrove Surgical Pavilion, had been endowed with a $7 million gift from a grateful patient whose wife, Dr. Hargrove had brought back from what the cardiology team had called a very narrow window. On the wall outside his office hung a framed letter from the American College of Surgeons naming him Fellow of the Year. He had been named Fellow of the Year twice. He was also, in the quiet estimation of most of the residents who rotated under him, someone who had been told he was brilliant for so long that he had stopped questioning it. He didn't ask for second opinions. He didn't review cases he'd already decided on. And he had a particular, consistent, and recognizable pattern of behavior towards students and residents he had pre-categorized in his mind as not worth his attention. The residents called it the freeze when Dr. Hargrove decided someone wasn't worth listening to. He would do something with his face, a slight, almost imperceptible tightening around the jaw. A half-turn of his body that positioned his shoulder between himself and the person speaking. That communicated, without a single word, that whatever was being said was simply not being received. Most people, when they got the freeze, stopped talking. The smart ones, the ones who wanted to survive the rotation, had learned to simply not speak unless directly addressed. To stand at the edges of rounds. To absorb and observe and keep their insights to themselves until the attending had left the room, and then quietly suggest things to the senior residents, who sometimes listened and sometimes ignored them and sometimes took the credit. This was the world Marcus Carter walked into on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying a cup of cold coffee from the vending machine and a spiral notebook that was already half full of observations from the last 2 weeks of pre-rotation shadowing. He didn't know yet about the freeze. He was about to get an introduction. But first, there was someone else he met that morning, someone who would become, quietly, the most important ally in a story that was heading toward a collision nobody could yet predict. Dr. Patricia Ackhaffer was 41 years old, and attending in internal medicine with a subspecialty in complex diagnostics, and she had been at Hargrove Memorial for 9 years. She was Nigerian-American, the daughter of an engineer and a schoolteacher from Akron, Ohio. And she had the particular combination of clinical precision and human warmth that the very best doctors seem to be born with. She had a habit of stopping in the hallway and actually looking at the students she passed, not through them, the way some attendings did, but at them with genuine attention. She stopped and looked at Marcus on his first morning. "You look like someone who's already been doing homework," she said. He almost smiled. "Since about September." "Good," she said. "Keep that notebook hidden during Hargrove's rounds. He doesn't like when students take their own notes. Says it looks like they're not paying attention to him." She walked away before he could process what that meant. He should have kept that notebook hidden. He didn't. It happened on a Thursday morning during grand rounds, week 2 of the rotation. 12 people stood in a loose semicircle around the bed of a 62-year-old patient named Raymond Osai, a retired postal worker, broad-shouldered, with the kind of permanent squint that comes from years of reading addresses in direct sunlight. He'd been admitted 3 days ago with what the admitting physician had diagnosed as severe GERD complicated by anxiety. He was on proton pump inhibitors and a mild anxiolytic. He was not improving. "Doctor." Hargrove stood at the center of the semicircle, arms folded, going through the chart with the brisk efficiency of someone who has reviewed the same category of case approximately 900 times and finds the exercise mildly irritating. The 2 senior residents flanked him. The 2 interns stood just behind. The 4 third years, including Marcus, stood at the outer edge, where the light from the window was thinnest. Marcus had been watching Mr. Osai since he'd walked in. He noticed the way the man shifted his position in the bed. Not the restless shifting of discomfort, but something more specific, a subtle, constant re-angling of his upper body, as though he was trying to find a position that would make the sensation in his back less acute. Marcus noticed the slight sheen of perspiration on Mr. Osai's forehead, despite a room temperature that made the residents zip their white coats. He noticed, when the nurse briefly took bilateral blood pressure readings during the start of rounds, that the left arm reading was 148/92, and the right arm reading was 117/78. A 31-millimeter differential. He wrote it down. "Doctor." Hargrove was finishing his summary of the plan. They'd continue the current regimen, increase the PPI dose, consult GI in the morning, when Marcus did the thing he would later tell Dr. Akafer he had to do. He raised his hand. There was a pause, not a long one, but long enough to be noticed. "Doctor." Hargrove looked at the raised hand the way someone looks at a noise in a room they were sure was empty. "Yes," he said, not warmly. Marcus kept his voice steady. "I noticed a blood pressure differential between the patient's arms, 31 millimeters. Combined with the presentation of the back pain and the diaphoresis, I was wondering if we should consider imaging to rule out aortic dissection before." "You were wondering," Dr. Hargrove repeated. The word was not a question. It was an echo, delivered with a particular inflection that turned it into something else entirely. He looked at Marcus for exactly 2 seconds, the full-body assessment of someone calibrating where another person falls in the hierarchy, and then he looked away. "Aortic dissection," he said, addressing the senior residents now as though explaining a child's mistake to other adults. "A diagnosis requiring a patient in acute distress, hypotension, and classic tearing chest pain radiating to the back. Mr. Osai has been eating 3 burritos a day for 30 years and presents with textbook reflux. The differential," he paused to glance at Marcus one more time, "is well within normal range for a man of his age and background." He turned back to the chart. "Does anyone have an evidence-based question?" One of the senior residents cleared his throat. 2 interns found something interesting to look at on the floor. A third-year student named Jenna, standing to Marcus's left, slowly exhaled through her nose. Marcus closed his notebook. He didn't argue, didn't flush with visible embarrassment, didn't look down. He looked at Raymond Osai. Mr. Osai was looking back at him. And in the old man's eyes was something Marcus recognized. The look of a person who has been dismissed many times and knows, without being told, Exactly what it means when someone finally stops pretending he isn't in the room. Marcus gave Mr. Osai the smallest nod he could manage. He would not let this go. What doctor? Hargrove didn't know. What none of them knew in that room was that the patient in bed 4 was not the only person in this story whose Yorta would become the center of everything. The rest of that Thursday passed in the particular kind of silence that settles over professional spaces, where someone has been put in their place, and everyone present has collectively decided not to acknowledge it. Marcus went about his afternoon, post-rounds write-ups, patient notes, the relentless administrative machinery of clinical rotations, and if the incident in Mr. Osai's room was still sitting in his chest like a stone, he kept that entirely to himself. That was something Nana Ruth had given him, among other things, the ability to carry weight without showing the strain. "Baby," she used to say, "the world is going to tell you what you are before it gives you a chance to show it. Your job is to just keep showing it anyway." He thought about that a lot. He thought about it especially when he sat down at a computer terminal in the residence workroom after rounds and pulled up Raymond Osai's chart. Officially, he was completing required documentation. Unofficially, he was looking at the blood pressure readings again, at the admission note. At the description of the onset, sudden, severe, he said it felt like something was ripping, that the admitting physician had categorized as characteristic of anxiety-related chest pain. Marcus sat with that for a long time. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, he arrived early for weekend rounds and walked past Mr. Osai's room. The bed was empty, freshly made. The monitors were dark. His stomach dropped. He found the night nurse at the station, a compact, efficient woman named Shirley who had been at Hargrove Memorial for 17 years and had seen everything twice. "Mr. Osai in 4, Marcus said. "He was discharged." Shirley looked at him over her reading glasses with an expression that was neither kind nor unkind. It was the expression of someone who has delivered bad news and good news in roughly equal measure and has made a kind of peace with both. "Transferred," she said. "Emergency vascular consult about midnight last night. Type of dissection. They're taking him to surgery now." Marcus stood very still. "Is he will he don't know yet," Shirley said. And then, because she had seen many things in 17 years, she added, "You flagged something, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. "I tried," Marcus said. Shirley looked at him for a moment that lasted just long enough to mean something. "Try louder next time," she said. He didn't celebrate the fact that he'd been right. There was nothing to celebrate. Raymond Os was a human being who had spent 3 days on the wrong diagnosis, who was now on an operating table because a 31mm pressure differential and a specific quality of back pain had gone unaddressed for 72 unnecessary hours. The satisfaction of being right was nothing next to the weight of what being wrong and being ignored had cost Mr. Osai. But he also filed away the knowledge carefully, precisely. The way you file away the things that matter. He had seen it. He had been right, and no one in that room had listened. The following week unfolded with the specific cadence of institutional life. Long days, short breaks, the endless rotation of patients and procedures and lectures and assessments. Marcus fell into the rhythm of it because rhythm was something he knew how to find. He was good at the work. Genuinely, demonstrably, quietly good. The interns who worked alongside him started to notice that his patient notes were the ones the residents saved as templates. The nurses started asking for him by name when a patient needed someone to sit and actually listen to their description of their symptoms. But none of this registered as significant to Dr. Richard Hargrove. To Dr. Hargrove, Marcus Carter was an abstraction, a placeholder in a rotation schedule. A name on a student evaluation form that would need to be completed at the end of the month, and that would require, what was it the educator's handbook said? No less than 3 direct clinical observations. Those observations happened. They just happen the way certain things happen when someone has already decided what they're going to see. The first one occurred during a pre-op patient consultation, 10 days into the rotation. Dr. Hargrove was walking through the case history of a 55-year-old woman, Mrs. Eleanor Graves, scheduled for elective gallbladder removal, when he turned to the students at the back of the room and asked, the way teachers sometimes ask questions they don't expect to be answered, Tell me the three most common complications from laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Every student in the room reached for their mental index. Marcus spoke first, not loudly, not competitively, simply with the directness of someone who knows the answer. Bile duct injury, vascular injury, and wound infection. Dr. Hargrove looked at him. Close, he said. He then gave the same answer in different words with a slightly different ordering of the 3 points. He did not say close to anyone else after that. He called on Jenna next, Jenna who was excellent but had been slightly slower to speak, and told her good when she gave a partially correct answer. It was such a small thing. The kind of thing that, if you described it to someone outside the room, they would say, "Are you sure? Maybe he just heard you wrong. Maybe he just preferred her phrasing. Maybe." But this happened again, 3 days later, and then again after that. The second observation occurred during a post-operative debrief in the surgical teaching theater. 6 students, 2 residents, and Dr. Hargrove reviewing footage from a procedure that morning. He paused the footage, a laparoscopic view of an unexpected anatomical variation, and asked the room what approach should be taken. Marcus gave a precise, well-reasoned answer that drew directly from a paper he had read the previous week in the Annals of Surgery. Dr. Hargrove didn't address him. He waited exactly 3 seconds after Marcus stopped speaking, then called on a resident named Bradley, who said essentially the same thing. Dr. Hargrove said, "Exactly, Bradley." Good thinking. Bradley had the decency to glance sideways at Marcus with an uncomfortable expression. Marcus kept his face still. What Bradley didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Marcus had started keeping a second notebook. Not for clinical observations, for these. The third observation was the one that drew blood. It was a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks in. Afternoon teaching session. Dr. Hargrove had assigned each third-year student a mini-presentation. 5 minutes, 1 case study, differential diagnosis and management plan. Standard rotation exercise. Marcus's case was a 22-year-old athlete presenting with exertional chest pain and occasional syncope. He had prepared carefully, layering his presentation with the precision of someone who builds arguments the way other people build structures, from the foundation up. He covered the epidemiology, the initial workup, the differential, cardiomyopathy, structural anomaly, arrhythmia, the imaging protocol, the management pathway, and the athletic clearance considerations. It was, by any reasonable measure, an excellent presentation. Dr. Hargrove listened with his arms folded and his shoulder at that particular angle. When Marcus finished, there was a brief, heavily freighted silence. "Interesting," Dr. Hargrove said finally. "Though I notice you didn't address the family history properly." "I did actually," Marcus said, quietly, without sharpness. "In the second slide. Paternal first-degree relative with sudden cardiac death, which I used to weight the probability toward HCM." Another silence. "Right," Dr. Hargrove said. He glanced at his watch. "Next presentation." That was it, that was all. But afterward in the hallway, one of the residents, a third-year named Dr. Amara Mensa, a black woman from Accra who had navigated this institution for 2.5 years, and knew its weather patterns the way sailors know the sea, touched Marcus's arm briefly as she passed him. "Don't let it hollow you out," she said without stopping. He watched her walk away and thought about what it meant to survive a place by understanding exactly what it was. He called Nana Ruth that night. He didn't tell her about Hargrove. He asked about her arthritis. He listened to her tell the story of something her friend Dolores had said at church. He laughed at the right moments. When she said, "You sound tired, baby," he said, "I'm good, Nana. Just working hard." After he hung up, he sat in the dark of his studio apartment for a while. And the photograph of James and Diana Carter on the windowsill caught what little light came through from the street below. He thought about his father dying in a parking lot because someone hadn't seen what was right in front of them. He thought about Raymond Osei. He thought about the second notebook. He did not yet know that the most important entry in that notebook was still 2 weeks away. The 4th week was the week things became public, not immediately, not all at once. But publicly, that word is important, because there is a difference between being dismissed in a room of 6 people and being dismissed in a room of 40. And week 4 was the week the rotation student cohort expanded. because the third-year surgical rotation had merged temporarily with the visiting medical students from two affiliated programs, Meharry Medical College in Nashville and Morehouse School of Medicine. In Atlanta, 23 additional students, plus their attending supervisors, plus the standard Hargrove Memorial residents and interns. Grand rounds that week was standing room only. Marcus came prepared. He always came prepared. But on this particular Tuesday morning, he came prepared in a specific way because Dr. Acaffer, who had been watching the situation with the particular, calm attention of someone who has been collecting evidence, had pulled him aside the afternoon before and said, simply, "Tomorrow's rounds include a vascular consult that I think you'll recognize. Be ready." She didn't say more than that. She didn't need to. The case was a 67-year-old woman named Margaret Hollies, admitted overnight with a presentation that the admitting team had categorized as hypertensive urgency with atypical chest pain. She had a history of chronic hypertension, well documented, and her blood pressure on admission had been 195/110. But there was a detail buried in the chart. A detail that a hurried overnight intern had noted almost in passing in the physical examination section under extremities, bilateral radial pulses present, though the right radial pulse appears slightly diminished compared to left. Marcus had seen that note the night before. He had not slept well. During rounds, Dr. Hargrove presented Mrs. Hollies' case in the crisp, efficient manner of someone who has already arrived at a conclusion. Hypertensive urgency. Adjust antihypertensive regimen. Continue monitoring. No further vascular workup indicated at this time. He opened the floor for questions, a formality mostly, and the room produced the usual polite silence of 40-something people deciding simultaneously that they do not have questions. Marcus raised his hand. There was a shift in the room, barely perceptible, but there. The visiting Meharry students who didn't yet know the dynamic looked mildly curious. The Hargrove Memorial third years exchanged glances of the here we go variety. Dr. Hargrove looked at him with the expression of someone who has already composed their response before hearing the question. "The pulse differential in the admitting note," Marcus said, keeping his voice measured, professional. Combined with the pain description, she described it to the intern as tearing, not squeezing. Tearing, in the context of her hypertensive history, which is a significant risk factor, I'd recommend a CT angiography of the chest and abdomen to rule out. CT angiography, Doctor. Hargrove repeated. He looked at the room, the whole room, all 40-something people, and what followed was what Marcus would later describe to Dr. Acaffer as the performance. "Ladies and gentlemen, Doctor," Hargrove said, addressing the room now with the light, instructional tone of a professor using a teachable moment. "This is a lovely illustration of what we call anchoring bias layered on top of premature closure. A medical student has read about aortic dissection. It's in the textbooks, it's in the lectures, it's a dramatic diagnosis, and now he sees it everywhere. Hypertension plus chest pain in a 67-year-old woman is, statistically, hypertensive urgency in 95% of presentations. Not every back pain is a dissection." He paused for a beat. "Not every student suggestion is a second opinion." Laughter from the residents. From a few of the students who didn't know better, or who did know better and laughed anyway because it was that or be the person who didn't. One of the visiting Meharry students, a young woman with sharp eyes and a notebook open in her hands, did not laugh. Marcus stood in that laughter and he let it wash over him. He kept his face absolutely still. He thought of Nana Ruth. He thought of James Carter in a parking lot. He thought of Raymond Osa waking up from emergency vascular surgery. He said nothing. What doctor? Hargrove didn't know, what no one in that room knew yet, was that Margaret Hollies would be moved to the vascular ICU within 18 hours. A stat CT angiography ordered by the overnight attending, Dr. Acaffer, would reveal a type B aortic dissection, contained and manageable, but requiring immediate medication adjustment and close monitoring to prevent propagation to a type A. She would be fine. Because of the overnight attending's instinct, because of whose instinct that overnight attending had quietly, professionally borrowed, Dr. Acaffer told Marcus about it 2 days later, in the small break room near the second-floor nurse's station. "I reviewed your chart notes from the night before," she said. "You had already flagged it. You filed it under your assessment," Marcus said, not an accusation, just a statement. "Yes," Dr. Acaffer said. "Because if I had filed it under yours, it wouldn't have been acted on." The silence between them held a truth that neither of them needed to name. "She's going to be okay," Dr. Acaffer said. "I know," Marcus said. "You know more than you're being allowed to show," she said. "That's not a compliment, that's a warning. Keep showing it anyway." He would think about those words later, in the most important moment of his life, when showing what he knew was the only thing standing between a man and death. The stakes escalated in the 5th week. Rotation evaluations were due at the end of week 6. In surgical rotations at Hargrove Memorial, the attending's evaluation carried 60% of the weight. The remaining 40% was distributed between the senior resident supervisor and the shelf exam score. Marcus's shelf exam scores were, historically, in the 93rd percentile range. His resident supervisor, Dr. Mensah, had told him privately that his evaluation from her would be outstanding. The 60%. That 60% was Dr. Richard Hargrove's. Marcus found out about the evaluation weight on a Wednesday afternoon, when he overheard 2 fourth-year students talking in the elevator. He stood very still while they spoke, and very still when the doors opened at his floor, and very still as he walked to the resident's workroom and sat down at a terminal. He pulled up the student handbook. He read the evaluation criteria. Demonstrated clinical judgment, assessed by primary attending. Communication skills and professional demeanor, assessed by primary attending. Medical knowledge application, assessed by primary attending. He closed the handbook. The practical reality was clear. A poor evaluation from Dr. Hargrove could cost Marcus points toward his Step 2 CS clinical log, could affect his residency application narrative, could send a signal to programs that he was a student with interpersonal difficulties, the polite institutional language for someone a senior physician didn't like. He called Nana Ruth that night. She could hear it in his voice this time, the way she always could, that particular tightness, that almost there crack in the composure. "Tell me," she said. So he did not all of it, enough. Nana Ruth was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Marcus, what does the Bible say about standing your ground?" "It says a lot of things about standing your ground, Nana. It says," she continued as if he hadn't spoken, "that God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown. That means keep working. That means keep loving the work. That means don't you let nobody convince you to be less than what you are just because they won't let you be seen." He breathed. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He went to work the next morning, and the morning after that. But what he didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that Dr. Richard Hargrove had his own private situation developing, one that had been building for months, and that was now, quietly, approaching a crisis of its own. Looking back, and people would look back extensively once everything came out, the signs had been there for a while. Dr. Hargrove had mentioned back pain in a passing comment during a department meeting in September. Pulled something in the gym, probably. "At my age, you spend more time managing the parts than using them." The residents had laughed politely. He'd moved on. In October, the same month Marcus's rotation started, one of the OR nurses had noticed that Dr. Hargrove had paused mid-procedure to adjust his posture, pressing one hand briefly against his lower back before continuing. She'd filed it under he's been on his feet too long and forgotten about it. His personal physician had noted, at a routine annual physical 2 months prior, that his blood pressure was elevated, 158/94. He was already on a beta blocker for a prior hypertensive episode. His physician had recommended increasing the dose. Dr. Hargrove, who spent his working hours telling other people how to manage their health, had not increased the dose. He had been carrying a low-grade discomfort in his upper back for approximately 6 weeks. He had attributed it, in the efficient and self-dismissive way of busy doctors, to stress, to posture, to the fact that he was 58 years old and had spent 30 years hunched over operating tables. He had not attributed it to the thing it actually was. Marcus, whose eye had been trained for years on exactly this constellation of details, had noticed things he had no business being certain about without proper examination. During rounds in week 4, he had noticed that Dr. Hargrove occasionally shifted his left arm slightly when taking notes, a small, unconscious self-protective gesture, the kind the body makes when it's trying to guard something. He'd noticed a subtle asymmetry in the way Hargrove held himself when standing, the left side carrying slightly more weight. He'd noticed these things the way he noticed everything, quietly, precisely, without judgment. He had not said anything. He had thought about it. He had turned it over in his mind with the careful uncertainty of a student who is genuinely unsure whether he is seeing a pattern or projecting one. And he had come to the conclusion, painful in its honesty, that even if he was certain, even if Raymond Osai's chart was open in his mind, next to whatever his eyes were telling him about this man, the relational reality of his situation made it nearly impossible to say anything. Who would believe him? The student who kept seeing dissections everywhere was now going to suggest that the chief of surgery himself needed a workup. He wrote it in the second notebook. He dated the entry. He documented his observations with the precision of a clinician and the caution of a man who understood what it meant to be wrong about this and what it meant to be right about it, and how differently those two outcomes would play out depending on who you were in this building. And then he went back to work. The final week of the rotation began on a Monday that felt, from the first hour, like the air before a storm, charged heavy. On the edge of something that hadn't happened yet, but that you could feel coming through the floor. The week's centerpiece was a departmental grand symposium, an annual event at Hargrove Memorial that combined the formal nature of a medical conference with the social dynamics of an audition. Attending physicians from 3 affiliated hospitals would be present. Department leadership would be present. The dean of the medical school, who made a ritual of attending this event every year, would be present, and Dr. Richard Hargrove would be performing the anchor procedure, a live surgical demonstration, transmitted via overhead camera to the symposium theater, of a complex minimally invasive aortic valve repair. His specialty, his showcase, the procedure he had performed over 300 times and that bore his name in a modified technique published in 2017, the Hargrove Modified Approach. It was, in every way that mattered to the institution, his day. On the Sunday evening before the symposium, Marcus sat in the break room with Dr. Acaffer, reviewing the cases she had flagged for him to study as part of their informal tutoring arrangement, something she did quietly and consistently for students she recognized. Regardless of rotation. "You've been watching him," she said, not accusingly, just observationally the way she always spoke. Marcus looked up from his notebook. "His left arm," Dr. Acaffer said. She set down her coffee. "And his posture, I saw you looking during the Thursday debrief last week." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said finally. "I could be wrong." "Tell me what you see," she said. So he did. The arm, the posture shift. The occasional facial micro-expression during physical activity, a brief tightening that could be discomfort, could be nothing. The blood pressure reading from a routine vital sign checked 2 weeks ago that a first year had taken and logged without follow-up. 162/96. Dr. Acaffer listened with the absolute stillness of someone who has trained themselves to receive information without letting the weight of it show. "You know what you're describing," she said. "I know what it could be," Marcus said carefully. "I don't know what it is. If it were a patient, I'd recommend imaging," Marcus said. "Without question." They sat with that. "He wouldn't hear it from you," Dr. Acaffer said. "And from me without examination, it's speculation." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm going to talk to his personal physician through proper channels," she said quietly. "This stays between us. It goes through the right process." Marcus nodded. Neither of them knew that proper channels would not be fast enough. Monday arrived. The symposium theater filled. The overhead cameras went live. 47 medical professionals settled into theater seats with coffee and programs, and on the large screen at the front of the room, operating room 4 came into view, scrubbed, lit. Arranged for the procedure with the precision of a stage set. Dr. Hargrove was at the center of it, as he always was. Marcus was at the edge, as he always was. He had been told, with the particular politeness of exclusion, that the symposium would be reserved for senior students and residents. third years could observe from the theater. He had taken a seat in the back row. He had his notebook. He had a view of the screen. He had also, in the way of someone who has developed the habit of watching everything, a partial view through the glass partition at the back of the theater, a direct sightline into the corridor that connected the theater to Or 4. The procedure began. For 40 minutes it was flawless. That word, flawless, was the honest word, whatever else Dr. Hargrove was. He was a surgeon of genuine skill. And in that room, doing the thing he had spent 30 years mastering, he was exactly who he believed himself to be. The residents in the theater watched with the specific reverence of people, observing something they genuinely want to achieve. Even Marcus, from his seat in the back row, could appreciate the precision of it. And then, at the 43rd minute, something small changed. It was not visible on the overhead camera. It was barely visible to Marcus through the partial glass sightline from the back of the theater. Dr. Hargrove paused. He made a small adjustment with his left arm. His scrub nurse touched his elbow, inquiring. He shook his head. He continued. At the 49th minute, the second-year resident standing directly across the table from Hargrove said something that wasn't audible in the theater. The overhead camera shifted slightly. Doctor. Hargrove's response was a gesture, brief, dismissive. At the 51st minute, Dr. Hargrove set down his instrument. This was not unusual. Surgeons set down instruments. It meant nothing. Except that he didn't pick it back up. He stood very still, one hand on the edge of the table, and the scrub nurse said something again, and this time Dr. Hargrove did not shake his head. He just stood there. And then, in a moment that the overhead camera caught, and the entire symposium theater watched in a silence that fell like a curtain, Dr. Richard Hargrove's legs gave out beneath him. The room erupted. The theater went from murmur to chaos in approximately 4 seconds. People stood. Someone called for a crash cart. The overhead feed from Or 4 showed 3 residents surrounding Dr. Hargrove on the floor, one of them already reaching for his wrist to check a pulse. A charge nurse was at the door. A second-year resident named Dr. Chen had taken the primary lead and was kneeling beside Hargrove, running a rapid assessment with the controlled urgency of someone doing exactly the right thing at exactly the right pace. In the theater, people were moving toward exits and toward phones. The department chief, Dr. Lawrence Webb, was already on his feet, halfway down the aisle. Marcus Carter sat still in the back row for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which his brain did something that brains trained for this do. It ran the symptoms. Sudden onset during physical exertion, preceded by days or weeks of back discomfort. Asymmetric arm posture, hypertension history, the arm guard, the postural shift. The left radial pulse he'd noticed was slightly different from the right. His notebook was open in his lap. He looked at what he'd written 2 weeks ago, then he stood up and he moved. He moved through the theater at a pace that was just fast enough to be purposeful and just controlled enough not to look like panic. Because panic in a corridor was contagious, and right now what this situation needed was not more panic. It needed someone who was absolutely certain. He was certain. He reached the corridor door and pushed through it, and the sounds of the theater fell behind him, and the antiseptic smell of the surgical corridor hit him, and he kept moving, past the scrub sinks, past the supply alcove, to the door of OR 4, which was propped open by the charge nurse's foot as she ran a cable from a portable monitor. Marcus stopped in the doorway. Dr. Chen was speaking into a radio, calling for a vascular consult. He was using the language of someone who suspects a cardiac event. He was calling for a cardiologist. Marcus could hear the specific words, wrong direction. Dr. Hargrove was on the floor. His color was the gray-white of old concrete that Marcus had seen in his mind since the very first line of this story. One hand against his chest. Breathing, shallow, rapid, diaphoretic. Eyes open and tracking, which meant he was conscious, which mattered. The second resident, Dr. Park, a first year, had an arm cuff on and was reading the blood pressure. 168/91, Park called out. And the other arm, Marcus said from the doorway, silence. Several faces turned toward him. Dr. Chen looked at him, at the student in the doorway in the oversized white coat. And in any other moment in any other world, he might have said, "You need to leave. This is a restricted area." That would have been protocol. That would have been reasonable. Instead, what Dr. Chen heard in Marcus's voice, the absolute, grounded, I know what this is quality of it, made him pause. "Check the other arm," Marcus said again, quietly, firmly, the voice of someone who has been waiting a long time to be allowed to use it. Dr. Park switched the cuff to the right arm. 147/83, Park said, 21 millimeter differential. Marcus stepped fully into operating room 4. "This is not a cardiac event," he said, addressing Dr. Chen with the measured precision of every late night, and early morning and year of grief and study and watching and waiting, distilled into one clear, unambiguous sentence. "This is a type, a aortic dissection. The blood pressure differential, the onset pattern, the presentation. He needs an emergency CT angiogram right now, and the vascular surgery team needs to be activated, not cardiology. And nobody," he looked directly at the intern who had just reached for the IV kit, "nobody gives him heparin or any blood thinners until we know the extent." The room held that statement in the way. Rooms hold things that have the ring of absolute truth to them. Dr. Chen, who was 31 years old and 2 years into his residency, and had been trained to trust evidence over authority, looked at the blood pressure differential written on the monitor. He looked at Dr. Hargrove, he looked at Marcus Carter. "Activate vascular," he said to the charge nurse. "Stat CT angio, chest and abdomen, no anticoagulation." He picked up his radio. And then the door to OR 4 opened behind Marcus, and Dr. Patricia Acaffer walked in. She took in the room in approximately 3 seconds. The floor, Hargrove, the monitors, Marcus's position and posture, and she said, with the calm authority of an attending physician who has arrived at a crisis and immediately understood its topography, "What do we have, doctor?" Chen said, "Suspected type aortic dissection. Student made the call." Dr. Acaffer looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Dr. Acaffer. Something passed between them that did not require words. The specific understanding of two people who had sat together in a break room the night before and looked at this possibility with the shared recognition of those who see what they see and know what it costs to say so. "Correct assessment," she said, and to the team, "Let's move." The next 23 minutes were the most important minutes of Richard Hargrove's life. The CT angiography team was ready in 4 minutes. Dr. Hargrove was moved to the scanner in 7. The images came back in 14. By the time the vascular surgery team chief, Dr. Renata Vasquez, arrived and reviewed the imaging, the diagnosis was not a question. Type aortic dissection. The intimal tear was in the ascending aorta, 2 centimeters above the aortic root. The dissection had extended into the aortic arch. It had not yet reached the coronary arteries. The margin, in Dr. Vasquez's assessment, was tight. She used that word specifically later in her report. Tight. If he'd gone another 30, 40 minutes without the right intervention protocol, Dr. Vasquez said, this was documented in the hospital's formal incident review, not speculative. The probability of coronary involvement or tamponade would have been significant. The no anticoagulation call was critical. That prevented us from making the situation catastrophically worse while we were still identifying what we were dealing with. Dr. Richard Hargrove was taken into emergency surgery at 11:47 that Monday morning. He was on bypass for 4 hours and 11 minutes. The surgery was performed by Dr. Vasquez and her team, and when it was over and Dr. Hargrove was transferred to the cardiac surgical ICU, and when the people in the waiting area, his wife, his colleagues, the department chief who had sat with his hands clasped for the better part of 5 hours, were told that he was stable, and the prognosis was excellent, the first question his wife asked was, "Who caught it in time?" There was a brief, particular silence in the waiting room. Dr. Chen, who had come down from the floor to deliver the update in person, looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up. "One of the third-year students," he said. Marcus Carter. The name meant nothing to Dr. Hargrove's wife, but it meant something to Dr. Lawrence Webb, the department chief, who had been standing against the wall with his arms folded, and who, upon hearing that name, closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds before opening them again. Because Dr. Webb had been in the symposium theater. He had heard, over the course of 2 weeks, from residents and nurses, and one very precise email from Dr. Patricia Acaffer, who had documented her concerns in writing 10 days ago exactly how this rotation had unfolded. He had been planning to address it. He had not planned for it to resolve itself quite like this. 3 days after the surgery, Dr. Richard Hargrove was awake, alert, and angry, not with the particular hot anger of pride, but with something quieter and harder to name. The anger of a man who has looked at something he did not want to look at and found that he cannot look away. His wife had told him the name again, Marcus Carter. He'd asked her to say it 3 times. Then he'd asked for his chart, read through the emergency protocol note, read the CT report, read Dr. Vasquez's surgical summary, and read, at the end of the file, the brief nursing note from the moment Marcus had stepped into the doorway of OR4. Medical student Marcus Carter, MS3, identified clinical findings consistent with type A aortic dissection. Recommended differential arm BP check. Result consistent with student's assessment. Correctly counseled against anticoagulation administration. Findings confirmed by CT angio and vascular surgery evaluation. He read that note 4 times. Then he pressed the call button for his nurse and asked for the attending on the floor. It was not Dr. Okafor. She was not assigned to that unit that week. But the attending who came knew enough about what had happened to understand the weight of the question Dr. Hargrove asked. Is he still here? The student, Carter. His rotation ended yesterday, the attending said. But yes, I believe he's still in the building. Hargrove's jaw tightened. I'd like to speak with him, he said. Marcus was in the residence workroom, completing his final rotation documentation. The last administrative task of the last day of a rotation that had cost him things he had not yet fully accounted, when Dr. Okafor appeared in the doorway. He's asking for you, she said. Marcus looked at her. You don't have to go, she said. You're under no obligation. He thought about that for a moment. Then he thought about James Carter, about Raymond Osei, about Margaret Hollies, about the second notebook and the night before the symposium and what it meant to carry something carefully and quietly and not let it hollow you out. I'll go, he said. The cardiac surgical ICU was 2 floors up and a world away from the surgical rotation corridor, and Marcus walked through it with the posture that Nana Ruth had given him, not aggressive, not diminished, simply present, simply himself. He knocked on the glass partition of room 7. Dr. Richard Hargrove looked older. The surgery had something to do with that. Bypass does things to the body that take time to reverse. But it was more than that. He looked like a man who had been handed a specific and very personal piece of information and was still in the early stages of knowing what to do with it. Marcus stepped inside. They looked at each other for a moment. Dr. Hargrove spoke first. Sit down, he said. Then, after a pause that felt like it was carrying several heavier words under its surface, please, Marcus sat. What followed was not a Hollywood scene. Dr. Hargrove did not weep and embrace him and deliver a perfectly constructed speech about the error of his ways. He was not that kind of man, and this was not that kind of story. What happened was something more complicated and therefore more real, the halting, uncomfortable, honest conversation of a human being sitting across from the consequences of their own behavior and not being able to pretend otherwise. You tried to tell me, Dr. Hargrove said, twice with the Osei patient with the Hollies woman. Marcus said nothing. He waited. I didn't listen, Hargrove continued. His voice was even, the way people speak when they are very carefully controlling something. I not only didn't listen, I made a spectacle of it, of you. He looked at his hands. In front of colleagues, visiting students. I want to understand something, Hargrove said. When you walked into that OR, when you had every reason in the world not to say anything, not to put yourself out there again, why did you? Marcus considered the question with genuine seriousness. Because there was a man on the floor, he said simply. That was enough. Hargrove looked at him for a long time. I'm going to recommend your evaluation be reviewed, he said finally. The one I was going to submit, it wasn't what it should have been. A pause. And I'm going to ask the department to review the rotation structure. What happened to you during those weeks wasn't acceptable. I understand that now, or I'm beginning to. Fully understanding it is going to take some time. Marcus nodded. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't perform forgiveness he hadn't yet arrived at, and he didn't pretend the last 6 weeks had been anything other than what they were. What he said was, "Get better, Dr. Hargrove." He stood up, he left. In the hallway outside, Dr. Ackaffer was waiting with 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, from the good machine on the 4th floor, not the vending machine on 2. She handed him one. "How was it?" she asked. "Real," Marcus said. She nodded. That was enough. What followed in the weeks after was the institutional machinery of accountability, grinding slowly but, in this case, actually moving. Dr. Hargrove submitted a revised evaluation, not inflated with false praise, but honest. Properly reflective of the clinical excellence and professional conduct Marcus had demonstrated throughout the rotation. He also submitted, voluntarily, a written statement to the residency program director, acknowledging that his feedback and interaction with Marcus Carter had not met the standards of his institution or his own stated professional values. It was the kind of statement that cost something to write. He wrote it. Dr. Lawrence Webb convened an informal review of the rotation experience. Not punitive, but structural, the kind of review that changes procedures rather than simply punishing individuals. He implemented a policy requiring documented clinical reasoning for any attending who publicly challenges a student's diagnostic suggestion during rounds without evidential basis. He called it, quietly and with a certain dry acknowledgement that the residents immediately understood, the Carter Protocol. The visiting students from Meharry and Morehouse heard the story through the medical school grapevine that carries information faster than any official channel. The young woman with sharp eyes and the open notebook, a third-year named Jasmine Caldwell from Decatur, Georgia, sent Marcus a message through the student network. It said, "We heard what happened. We heard what you did. Thank you for not going quiet." Marcus read that message 3 times, then he saved it. 2 months later, Marcus received his residency match results. Internal medicine with a fellowship pathway in vascular medicine. Johns Hopkins Hospital, his first choice. He called Nana Ruth at 6:42 in the morning, which was fine because she had been awake since 5, the way she always was. Making coffee in the kitchen of the house on Fulton Avenue, with the screen door that still didn't close all the way. She didn't say anything for the first 10 seconds after he told her. Then she said very quietly, "James would be so proud of you, baby." And for the first time in a very long story, Marcus Carter let himself cry. Raymond Osai, the retired postal worker from Room 4, made a full recovery after his emergency surgery. He sent a card to the hospital's third-year rotation office. Because he didn't know Marcus's name, only that a young student had noticed something, and the card said, "Tell the young man who saw what others didn't. He saved my life, and I don't know his name, but God does." Someone in the office made sure that card found Marcus's mailbox. He keeps it next to his parents' photograph on the windowsill. There are things this story is about on its surface. Medicine hierarchy. A young man who knew something and was told he didn't, and who turned out to be right in a way that saved the life of the very person who dismissed him. Those things are real. They matter. But underneath the medicine and the hierarchy and the dramatic reversal, this story is about something quieter and more durable. It's about what it means to keep knowing what you know in a room that is telling you that you don't. About the specific courage of maintaining your dignity when the people with authority over your future are actively working to make you feel small. Marcus Carter did not save Dr. Hargrove's life to prove a point. He did not step into that operating room because it was poetic or just or satisfying, though it was all of those things. He stepped into that room because a man was on the floor and Marcus knew something that could help him. That's it. That was the whole calculation. That kind of simplicity, "There is a person who needs what I have, and I have it," is not actually simple at all. It requires a relationship with your own knowledge that is so deep and so secure that it cannot be undermined by someone else's contempt. It requires having something inside you that doesn't depend on external validation to stay lit. Not everyone has that. Not everyone is given the conditions to develop it. Marcus was given those conditions in the most unlikely of places, a kitchen table in West Baltimore, where a woman named Ruth kept the electricity on and the homework done, and told a little boy who had lost everything that his job, his only job, was to keep showing the world what he was. She knew something, Nana Ruth. She always did. We also have to sit with the complexity of Dr. Hargrove. He was not a monster. He was a talented, accomplished man whose accomplishedness had, over time, quietly calcified into the kind of certainty that stops seeing, that stops listening, that mistakes familiarity with knowledge and confidence with wisdom. The cruelest thing about that kind of blindness is that it often wears the costume of excellence. It can look, from certain angles, like the justified authority of someone who really has seen more than you. But seeing more doesn't mean seeing everything. And the person who has seen less of the world is not always the person who has seen less of what matters. Sometimes the person who sees what others miss has been trained, by loss and love and grief and determination, to see exactly that thing, the thing that everyone else has filed under not worth looking at. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this: the truth doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it walks into a room wearing an oversized white coat and speaks in a quiet voice from the back of a crowd, and gets dismissed before it can finish its sentence. It doesn't stop being the truth. It doesn't stop being the truth. If stories like this one speak to you, stories of quiet dignity, of knowledge that refuses to be silenced, of justice that arrives in forms nobody expected, then I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. These are the stories that deserve to be told, and more of them are waiting, because I keep reading, I keep looking. And I keep finding people like Marcus Carter, people who carry something real and rare and precious, and who hold on to it even when the world is doing everything it can to convince them it isn't there. But this story of quiet triumph is just the beginning. Because what happened when a former world champion walked into a corporate boardroom and was told, by a room full of executives in expensive suits, that he didn't have the right background for the position, and what he said next, and what he showed them, and what happened to every single one of those executives in the 12 months that followed, that's a story that will make you put your hand over your mouth. Until next time,